Today on the Blockchain Report, Bitcoin sitting around 92K, and it might be because my prompter thing just jumped and I don't know where I am. All right, we're back, and it might be because Europe just set a hard deadline to cut off all Russian gas, because nothing says energy independence like a €40 million fine for cheating. Now, the US just froze immigration processing for 19 countries, adding even more uncertainty to an already overloaded system. And Donald Trump says his MRI wasn't the brain, but don't worry, he aced the cognitive test again. All that and more right now on today's show. Let's go. All right, happy Wednesday, my people, and welcome to the Blockchain Report. We're getting started with today's top news in our bull run, and we've got a lot to talk about, so let's not waste any time and get on into it. First up, the European Union has reached a formal agreement to phase out all Russian gas imports by September 30th of 2027, ending a 57-year energy partnership that once supplied nearly 40% of Europe's total demand. Now, the deal includes a ban on Russian LNG starting in January of 2027, with spot purchases disappearing even earlier. Now, here's what this actually means. You see, Europe has spent nearly 2 years trying to unwind its dependence on Moscow after the invasion of Ukraine. But even last year, the bloc still sent almost €10 billion to Russia for natural gas. Now, this new agreement puts a hard expiration date on that relationship and adds legal penalties for anyone who tries to cheat. Penalties that start at €40 million and can scale up to more than 3% of annual revenue. The timeline, well, it's aggressive. Spot LNG ends in April of 2026. Spot pipeline gas ends in June of 2026. And by late 2027, the entire pipeline era that began in 1968 will be over. Some countries can request a temporary 4-week suspension, but only with Commission approval, which is Brussels' polite way of saying, don't count on it. Now, Europe has been racing to replace Russian supply by ramping LNG imports from the US and Qatar, accelerating renewables, and learning that energy independence requires a lot more spreadsheets than slogans might suggest. Now, the bigger geopolitical signal is that Europe is actively lowering Russia's leverage as peace talks drag on. For Moscow, gas exports were always a source of revenue and a pressure point. For Europe, this is the clearest commitment yet that it wants the relationship severed, even if it costs more in the short term. And while none of this directly affects Bitcoin, it does highlight how quickly global energy markets can realign when a major player is seen as a long-term risk. That has implications for everything from commodity pricing to Europe's long-term economic stability. And joining us to chat about this and many of more top stories, we got the man who can connect the dots like no one else, Nolan Bowerly, joining us here in the studio this morning. Nolan, happy Wednesday. How are you? Always a pleasure having you here on the show.
I'm loving life. I'm enthusiastic about the future of humanity and energy in Europe.
Oh, Nolan, your optimism is everything I'm not about humanity, but I love it and I'm here for it, and you are the bright sunshine that keeps me going every morning. So we're excited to have you here.
We love
and I
sunshine.
want to talk about this. You love it. I'm glad. I need some right now. Please give it to me. So I want to get into the story, though. Europe has formally decided to cut off all Russian gas by 2027, ending a dependency that started back in the 60s. From your point of view, what happens geopolitically when a relationship that old and that central gets severed almost overnight?
I think the main story here is going to be European sovereignty in the end, because the EU is a deliberative body put on top of individual European Union nation states. And they were designed to really create economic relationships between the states to avoid war. The point was, it's like the McDonald's argument, like, two countries that have McDonald's have never really fought against each other. No, it's nothing to do with the delicious McDonald's burgers. It has more to do with, they've got supply chains now, they've got economic integration. It's a lot harder to sever those ties. So when the European Union is saying they're doing this, they're actually speaking for individual sovereign nations. Not all sovereign nations are into what the EU is saying. So you get an instance, for example, like the EU yesterday criticized the country of Hungary for something democratic, blah, blah, blah. But they don't really have the moral high ground to stand on, right? The EU is the same body that influenced the Romanian elections last year. A lot of people were talking about that. We saw them also get involved in the German elections. We've heard nothing from the EU about what's going on in France. The leading party has been banned. The candidate from the leading party in France is banned from the elections. We saw someone in Germany just last week tweet out that, or put on X, that government employees were parasites. He had the police at his door within minutes. So the idea, and even just this morning, we had an undersecretary of the EU who had their office raided by police yesterday. So there's corruption, discussions around what's going on in the EU, the moral high ground of the EU to continue to get individual states to forget their sovereignty is not really there. So I think this will turn into a conversation amongst various European countries about what the EU is actually supposed to do, what the EU is actually geared towards. We saw yesterday also in Europe, Putin come out and say that Europe is not even welcome at the peace discussions because they have nothing to add and they have no plan. So from all of that, right, you can tell that money still will talk, that EU can't decide what's going on with India, and the Indian pipeline doesn't look affected by this. Will Europe go back to buying Indian Russian oil? Who knows? I think the real answer in the end, the fallout, will be more about the unelected EU and the type of a bridging of European individual nation state sovereignty that is the bigger story here. And I think the trend is individual European states are going to want to claw back what they've given up to the European Union over the past 60, 70 years.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, this shift is interesting because it's happening really fast, seemingly, Nolan. Spot LNG ends next year. Pipeline gas ends the year after. Do you see this pace as maybe a sign that Europe is genuinely ready to redesign its entire energy map, or is this more political symbolism that may wobble once energy prices actually get painful?
Oh, I would even say it's extreme political theater because it's not reality. It's not grounded in reality. If they're willing to say, okay, we're not going to heat our houses, we're going to let some people die, we're going to shut down industry, okay, then they're serious. But they don't have a plan to replace this stuff. I don't see a nuclear reactor going in.
Right.
They're shutting them down. So either they accept a lower
Right.
quality of life, or they pay way more for electricity, which they can't afford to do. So it is extreme. It's outside of reality in the sense that it's an extreme version of fiction. And I think that's what you even heard Putin say. I mean, that's what I did my show on today, was that Putin line about once Europe wants to engage with reality, maybe they can come back to the table. But if they want to stay out in a land of fiction, in a land of, oh yeah, we can just get rid of we don't need that energy, we'll replace it with what? With what? Right? You've either got to consume less
Right.
energy. And what's the plan for that? You can say all you want, we're going to ban this and we're going to ban that, but it's another thing when people are trying to eat raw eggs versus a nice little omelet. The Europeans are used to eating their nice little omelets and their nice little dishes. What's going to happen if everything's going to be, cold sandwiches? I don't know. I don't think they're going to like it.
Yeah, that's just not proper. And, you know, the Europe right now is arguing that these measures would reduce Russia's leverage, but now the EU will rely more heavily on US and Qatari LNG instead. So my question, Nolan, is what kinds of new vulnerabilities or dependencies does that create? And do you think European policymakers fully understand that trade-off right now?
No, I don't think they do, and I don't think their real problem is inside. So it's the states themselves, and because they're not elected, really, they're not. You know, the lady who runs it, von der Leyen, that's an appointed person, and apparently she holds a lot of the discretion in that body. And what you're going to get, I think, is just more Brexit, but pushed throughout the system. I mean, France on their if the leading party wins, if the Front National, which is the Marine Le Pen party, wins, and this is not an upstart party. They've been around since 2002. They made it to the final. So the way the French system works is anyone can run for president. You do one election, and the top two go on about a month later for a runoff. So it would be like if all the primary candidates were one pile, they do an election in like April, and then they skip ahead till May and do the next one. So I was actually living in France when these people started. This party started. I got caught up in a protest. My train stopped. I was coming from London. I couldn't go anywhere. And this has been going on since then. So this is not an upstart party. They've been around forever. It was the father of the woman running, who was banned from running. But their entire policy objective is to leave the EU. The EU can't survive without France and Germany. It really is about France and Germany, and everybody else is kind of along for the ride. That's why the capital of the EU rotates, right? It goes between Brussels, which is sort of was not a real country. It's always just been a buffer zone between Germany and France, and never, no one wanted to claim it because it was too messy. And the next capital would be Strasbourg, which is another one of these formerly German cities that the French took over during the World Wars. But that's the point. The EU switches capitals so that it doesn't insult the French or the Germans. And that's really what it is. Now, you could come up with a new bloc, like a Latin bloc, like the French and the Spanish and the Italians. They have very similar economies, very similar needs, versus a northern bloc, which would be Germany and the Scandinavian countries, who are not really involved in the EU anyway. They're in Norway's not even in. Denmark and Sweden use their own money. They never took the euro. So it would make sense if you turned it into these sort of a Eastern European German bloc, but then you're right back into the World War I fault lines. So you're going to see a lot of arguments about sovereignty. You're going to see a lot of people say, well, we're going to pull sovereignty out of the EU. We're going to recalibrate the EU. And so, yeah, I think the main story is going to be the reverse. Not so much is the EU cementing itself atop the European Union making decisions about energy. It's going to cultivate more protest amongst Europeans about their loss of sovereignty, because German needs aren't the same as Greek needs, aren't the same as Italian needs. It's different weather. It's compared to America, it's very complicated to keep all of these people on a very similar footing, especially when you don't have as much legitimacy from the executive or federal branch of power. They're not seen as legitimate by a lot of Europeans. And so that's going to be threatened in the next round of elections in Europe. If you look at what's going on in Germany, not only was that person arrested for the tweet, you've got the AfD, the second place party, but polling now first. And they're an upstart. They're not like the one in France. They're kind of new. And we've seen a bunch of their candidates get assassinated. Like 6 or 7 candidates are dead. And it's not good. So Germany is going to change too. So.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the Europe as a whole has this very complex set of issues that are, it kind of reminds me of the United States a little bit. Like we're together, but we're also divided by these little differences that ultimately become very big over the grand scope of things. So those European leaders got a lot to work on right now. And that actually brings us to our next story that I want to chat about, because those same European leaders are saying that Russian President Vladimir Putin is pretending to support peace negotiations after 5 hours of talks with U.S. envoys Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner produced no measurable progress. Now, Ukraine and its allies argue that Moscow is signaling cooperation publicly while offering no movement on core issues privately. Here's where things stand. Putin insists he hasn't rejected the United States' proposal, but his own advisor admitted that no compromise has been found, especially on the central dispute: Russia's demand to keep control of 4 Ukrainian regions it partially occupies. Ukraine says that's a non-starter for them. European governments worry that any deal granting Russia territorial gains would only encourage more aggression, especially as Russian drones, jets, and sabotage attempts continue across the continent. Now, the U.S. under President Trump has taken a more hands-on role with direct shuttle diplomacy, but its proposal leaked last month and was wildly criticized for leaning too heavily in Moscow's direction. Now, after the meeting, European officials expressed frustration. And sorry, this new system we got here has been a little troubling here for me. It keeps messing up. So they've expressed frustration with the current talks, and I'm totally lost here, guys. So either way, Russia's signaling openness to peace while doubling down militarily. Ukraine signals openness to negotiation while refusing to surrender any territory. And European leaders who have already spent billions supporting Kiev say they won't back any deal that gives Russia free rein. So for now, the talks are continuing quietly, which diplomats say is good, but the gap between what each side wants remains pretty enormous right now. Nolan, coming back to you. After 5 hours of talks with U.S. envoys, Putin insisted he's open to peace while offering zero concessions. When a leader publicly performs cooperation but privately refuses movement, what's the real strategy behind that posture here? What do you think?
Well, he's negotiating, and I think he's accurately understanding who the parties of negotiation are, which are the Americans and them. I think most of his rejection was about underlining the Europeans' lack of standing in negotiations, and how when I read his complaints about why negotiations broke down, he gave an impromptu press conference. So he came out and listed all the reasons why it failed and why Europe is so weak and why they can't be involved in this conversation. And again, he did underline that they don't live in reality, and that the reality is a question of power. And the only two groups that have power to discuss what's going on there are America and Russia. So that's a hard thing for Europe to really grapple with, that they're not powerful enough to be in a conversation, because it doesn't really jive with their own, let's say, self-image. Not that I can mind read what's going on in Europe, but Europe is not used to being excluded due to lack of power. That would be the first time in centuries where that was the circumstance. So it's a little hard to see. Now, in the case of Ukraine, it's the same thing, right? We see the investigations into Ukraine and the corruption going on. We're hearing the conversation in America, certainly. But again, the chief of staff to Zelensky was arrested the other day, and they've raided his offices. They're going in and talking about what's going on there. I think there's even some legacy news outlets today reporting that Zelensky is out, that European leaders have also given him an ultimatum to leave and not be a part of the negotiations. So I think this is more about getting the other parties outside of America and Russia out of the conversation so that it remains really bilaterally between the United States and Russia. Because, again, it might offend our sense of sovereignty and nations and who's involved and fairness. It's certainly unfair, right? There's no question fairness is not a part of the equation. But this is war, and fairness just isn't a factor when it comes to these things. It's just not. It's not relevant. It's something that people can talk about, right? But that's all it is in the end. It's just a way to frame it so you can talk about it. In the end, it's a power play. America has a lot of power in this conversation. They can determine what's going on with Ukraine and Europe, because America's got itself out of paying the bills. So it comes back to Trump has a lot of patience. He's just sitting around. He can make money off the war. I mean, he set up America to monetize what's going on, which was not what Joe Biden did. Joe Biden was funding it. The difference between Trump and Joe Biden is Trump is not funding it. He's selling weapons, not the same thing. Europe has to pay for those weapons for America. So Trump in his position is fine, right? He doesn't need to negotiate. He can keep letting them kill each other. He can keep making money, and that'll be that. Now, no one wants to see people dying, so I don't think that's really what he wants, but that's what he can take. Now, in the case of Russia, they can also keep killing people for a long time. They got a lot of bodies. I think you've heard it said many times, Putin can just keep throwing bodies at the problem, and he's got more bodies than they do in Ukraine. That's his strategy. But what's going on in Ukraine is the same that's going on in Europe. There is a crisis of legitimacy with these governments. It has nothing to do with their positions on what's going on with Ukraine in particular. They just don't have the power to be able to influence it. So this is a question of power, not fairness, not our ideals of sovereignty. We're not in that world anymore. That world is gone. We're in a world where power projection and the contours of physics matter more. And so Russia, it's got to be economic. They don't seem to mind killing their young people. Okay. They're going to hate losing money. They're going to hate being poor. And so the sanctions didn't work, but indeed the Indian gas pipeline is probably the thing that they need running the most, and America will continue to leverage that if they need to. And that's why I don't think the war lasts much longer. I do think that both the American and Russian administrations are out of patience for what this is costing, and they still have a bit left, but I think it's more about getting other parties out like the Ukrainians and the Europeans.
It kind of reminds me, and maybe this is an incorrect parallel, but wasn't it during the Revolutionary War? It was kind of a proclamation by the Union that, like, hey, this isn't a war about cessation from the United States or like the Union. This is about slavery, and that was actually an effort to keep a lot of the European powers at bay, because if they thought it was the South seceding from the war as opposed to a war about slavery, they would have been more incentivized to jump in and help the South. At least that's how I always understood it, but you're a much better steward of history than I am, so let's get back to the topic here.
It was kind of like
that accurate?
Yes, it's correct. Yes,
Kinda.
accurate.
Yeah. Okay, so I wasn't totally off base. I appreciate the acknowledgement there. Now back to the story here. One of the major sticking points right now that seemingly is preventing a conclusion that we're all dying for in this is that Russia is insisting on keeping 4 Ukrainian regions it partially occupies. Historically, Nolan, in conflicts like this, which side usually has the leverage? The one holding the territory or the one refusing to legitimize that very occupation?
Yeah, I'd say it's like in Bitcoin, right? In Bitcoin, we understand that possession is, the whole game. It's 10/10 of the law of Bitcoin. And even in international law, which isn't kind of real, but the idea of possession being sort of 9/10 of it is there, right? You've got to have people publicly acknowledging it, but just one major country like America acknowledging it would be enough to get it through. They don't need much more than that. Over time, after that, it will just sort of crystallize. Now, there's things like what we did with Taiwan, right? So they kicked Taiwan out of the UN in the 1970s in order to readmit the Communist Party. And that took time, but America doing it is what set it in motion for other countries to follow. So remember, the UN was mostly set up in order to hide American imperialism. The point that Eleanor Roosevelt really had was she didn't want it to look like British style, run from a crown, run from the king's court. She wanted it to have the semblance of individual national sovereignty. And her husband did think that way. He was of that mind before he passed away. He didn't have as big a hand in implementing it after. But originally, that was the concept, that you could let the UN perform American imperialism, which was a much lighter touch than British imperialism. It was what you see in Japan and Korea and Germany. We're going to pay for everything. We're going to rebuild it. You just can't let the psychos run your country. You're going to let the merchants run your country, and you're going to trade with us. So the UN was created for that purpose. It was created to make sure that American imperialism could, somewhat take into account national sovereignty, but still hide their influence, hide that it was their thumb on the scale. And so when you see these international agreements and international law, really it boils back to what America will decide to do. If America really does, for example, if America, and I think the deal makes sense, where America will leave them as a no man's zone, but let's not forget that the no man's zone that they're all talking about might be the reason why the war started in the first place, because that's where they have the rare earth minerals. That's where you have all of the stuff that when Trump says we're going to make an economic partnership and that'll be security, we're going to send engineers, we're going to send miners to your area to go and extract those resources. That way Russia will never attack us because it's going to be American teams on the ground. That's what he's talking about. So if you put enough economic interest there, eventually it will come to its own, sort of consciousness of what it is, Russian, Ukrainian, maybe its own thing, maybe unique. I mean, Trump is doing this in the Middle East as well. When he threw in the 3-state solution to the Middle East, I mean, he's the ultimate box shaker, right? He can create, if you're in an unwinnable situation, he can create a new circumstance. For example, when everyone's saying who gets Gaza, and he says, actually, Christians are going to get it. And now he hasn't really followed up on it, but that's a problem for everybody. I mean, the Israelis won't be able to do what they've done to Gaza if it's Christians there. You're not going to see the rest of the Middle East kind of doesn't care anymore about what's going on over there. They're kind of ready to let it go. So not that I know that that's a solution that Trump's going to get to in the Middle East with the 3-state solution and a Christian country created there in order to keep the peace and keep the status quo down. It's just an example of him shaking the box, and then suddenly new circumstances appear. So you can imagine that that's what's going to happen with these commercial areas, that there is probably a pathway that we've never seen before, but that can lead to peace through this commercial integration of these people.
Okay, well, I certainly hope that. I know we're all hoping for peace, but one kind of slippery slope here that I think a lot of European leaders are kind of concerned about right now is that if granting Russia territory would only kind of encourage maybe more aggression in the future. So, Nolan, from your historical lens, how valid is that fear, and what past conflicts does this maybe remind you of? Like, if we were to do this, doesn't that kind of set a precedent for maybe like China and Taiwan in the future? Like, that seems to be a slippery slope. Is that something European leaders should be concerned about?
No, that's what's happening. I don't think America is going to be able to keep Taiwan the way it is for much longer. It doesn't look like it can happen. I mean, America probably won't lose its influence in Japan because it's so heavily psychologically based now, and those folks, right. Like the Koreans and the Japanese are really American through education crossover, through culture, through baseball, through all these cultural crossovers. Taiwan, a lot less so. Even though a little bit, there was a Yankees pitcher from Taiwan for a little while, and they do play baseball over there. It's a thing. But it's still much more China, and you can imagine that once America is creating its own microchips, that Taiwan is gone. So the idea that the world's borders were fixed after World War II, which we all pleasantly enjoyed 80 years of more or less fixed borders, and they called it the end of history. Remember, they said it's over, like we've evolved past this. Right. The world is now set. That's not the case. The borders will continue to change, and I don't think there's much America can do about it. It's more just brace yourself for the change, get ready for the change, and make sure you're in a good position to not be surprised. But long term, I don't think anyone in America, the best thing we can do for, and I heard Palmer Luckey say this recently, and it's probably the best thing we can do for all of our former imperial partners like Taiwan. I think you said it a few days ago on the show that America was the world's policeman for a long time, that America was the policeman of the world. Palmer Luckey came up with an amazing reframe about that, where he said, actually, we should be the world's gun store. We should have an array of weapons that if anyone in the world wants to fight, okay, all right, well, here, come to our store. We'll offer you things. The greatest thing we could do for Taiwan is to leave them with the Second Amendment and say, all right, it was nice knowing you. Good luck. We've given you a Second Amendment right. You've imported the Second Amendment right. We'll see what happens. And sell them all the guns they need. And we don't have to go over there, but will China come in if they have all the guns? I don't think so. I think they're going to peaceably find a way to integrate China and Taiwan. And maybe the CCP won't even be around then. Who knows? They have their own change to go through. Right. And to me, that's the thing in China that's keeping Taiwan out. It's not China and Taiwan. They have everything in common. It's the CCP. Right. So that's how I see it. The borders are changing. America probably is going to change too. I don't think it's going to shrink. I think the very concept of what an American state is can change.
Yeah, it's definitely going to change, and our next story gets into that, so let's transition here right now, because the Trump administration has halted immigration applications, including green cards and citizenship processing for people from 19 countries already subject to the travel ban, affecting some of the most vulnerable populations seeking legal status. Now, the pause takes immediate effect and has created confusion across U.S. citizenship and immigration services offices nationwide. So here's what's happening. The policy targets applicants from nations such as Iran, Somalia, Afghanistan, Haiti, Sudan, and Venezuela, and blocks progress on everything from routine interviews to naturalization ceremonies. Immigration lawyers report that clients who waited months, sometimes years, for appointments showed up this week only to learn that their cases had been removed from the system without explanation. Now, officials say the pause is in response to last week's shooting in Washington, where the suspect was an Afghan national who had been granted asylum in April. The administration argues the measure is necessary to intensify vetting and reevaluate asylum approvals issued under the Biden administration. Critics say the policy effectively shuts down nearly every remaining legal immigration pathway for people from these countries and will worsen already severe processing backlogs. Officials have also launched reviews of past green card approvals and paused asylum decisions, reinforcing the idea that the entire system is being tightened at once. This situation affects more than just individuals waiting on paperwork. For some families, it means years of waiting that could stretch into something resembling indefinite limbo. From a policy standpoint, supporters view it as tightening national security. Opponents view it as undermining legal immigration itself. Either way, this is one of the most sweeping administrative pauses in decades, and with more than 1.5 million asylum cases already backlogged, it's unclear how or when the system will ever recover. Bringing Nolan back. Nolan, the U.S. has now paused green card and citizenship processing for people from 19 travel ban countries, stopping everything from interviews to naturalization ceremonies. When a government freezes an entire category of immigration at once, what long-term ripple effects does that create inside such a massive system?
Well, I think the pause is a consequence of a ripple effect that's already here, which is when you try to mix, when you try to mix a generous government policies for food stamps and SNAP and all of these things, and when you offer so many benefits to residency and citizenship, that there's a huge financial burden that comes with the benefits and privileges of citizenship, you actually create a cost to every immigrant. So in the world when America was built off of open borders and free immigration, remember there was nothing you got when you arrived. You had to figure it out, right? You got maybe, if I remember, the Ellis Island came with a pamphlet that said, walk, don't run, you're in America now, none of your old world is going to help you. You need to move your ass because you're going to drown if you don't. It wasn't so impolite as that, but it was a document that basically said, you're in a new world, it's really hard, good luck. And that's all you got was a pep talk. And so if you were in a world where there was you can go to the Middle East right now, and you can go to Qatar, and you can go to UAE, and you can see these are places with huge immigration systems, but they don't give you anything. You can come and work, and that's it. And so in the United States, because we had a very generous system, at a certain point, because we're dealing with finite resources, it's a question of where to allocate those resources. If every immigrant costs money, and you can measure that money, then it becomes a domestic question. If you saw the SNAP benefits being cut, that conversation now, if you look at what's happening in Minnesota, it goes right into the conversation about immigration. And so what you're dealing with is the consequence of resource allocation and a welfare state that grew up in America, which ended up bringing privileges and benefits to individual people. And so if immigrants are absorbing those, then it's at the cost of Americans. So the conversation, I don't think, is centered so much on immigrants themselves. It's centered on the public safety net the government provides Americans and how much that safety net has been tattered by immigration. So I think it's a calibration issue. I think it's just a matter of getting back to a political point where people are happy with the calibration, they're happy with the amount that it costs for an immigrant, and they're happy with the amount of benefits that Americans get. So, but it is an economic question. Just look at Canada. They've increased now immigration from Canada. They created a new visa yesterday for Canadians to come to the United States, and it was a blue collar visa. So they're stripping Canada of welders, of plumbers, of construction workers, of all these people. And, Canada has immigration as well. So as long as they have a Canadian citizenship, doesn't matter where they're born, they're eligible for those. So it looks like they're just doing more targeted stuff based on jobs. They're trying to move immigration back to a working situation and less about a getting situation. So I don't know all the details, but I'd say that's where most of the American public finds itself right now, is widely pro-immigration. Even a lot of the MAGA folks, widely pro-immigration, but they don't want the benefits to immigrants to be taken from Americans who need those services otherwise. So that's where I see the conversation, especially the one in Minnesota that's blown up into several billion dollars worth of fraud. And that's where this all came from, right? It was banning Somalia and then the wider stuff that came out of it.
Right. And the administration currently, Nolan, is saying that this pause is necessary for security reviews following the DC shooting we spoke of. Historically, do these kind of broad security-driven crackdowns actually improve national safety, or do they just tend to create bottlenecks that are difficult to unwind later?
Well, fewer people in the country, just no matter what. I mean, I did a story yesterday where I was laughing. There was an expert who said that because there's a bunch of bear killings in Canada, grizzly bears, and they said, actually, killing the bears won't change how many deaths there are. And I'm like, are you sure about that? Like, are you sure if we don't have yes bears,
Come again?
Or like, if I kill all the bears, am I still going to have people dead of bear? Like, it makes no sense, right? So it's
No.
a bit like that, right? Yeah, it's a bit of a math trick here, where if you they're saying they're going to pause until they figure it out, it's really just about pausing, and they'll change if they have some better economic condition that comes out of it. Really, what I think is going on is they're structurally trying to completely change how immigrants come to the country, and they'll use any excuse at this point, security review, whatever it is. It won't really change. Like, of course, if you have fewer immigrants, you're going to have fewer issues. But the wider conversation, it's just a convenient argument. It's just convenient to pull that. It's not really going to change the world. The important thing is there's a political sense, and I think Republicans are on top of that, that Americans are, of all, a wide composite of Americans want the number lower, and they don't want as much competition. You're seeing, I think yesterday, if you saw, Trump did his big cabinet meeting when he brings all of his executive cabinet members and puts them all around a table and they all take turns, and you had RFK and you had Lutnick talking about Intel, and it's a really great setup that he does because it gives everyone the chance to brief him, and then we get great media clips from each and every one of these people. And if you noticed, Mamdani, from day one, when he came out with the affordability line, I said, that's a winner. He's going to go very far with this line. This is what Americans are very concerned about, affordability. But you saw Trump steal the line. He stole it in front of us. He just said, oh, Mamdani's got a great idea. I'm going to use that. Every one of those cabinet members in the thing yesterday tied their talking points to affordability. If it was immigration, Kristi Noem, it was about affordability. It's the immigrants that are making everything more expensive. They're buying all the groceries and the SNAP and everything. The SNAP person came out and said, we're cutting down on SNAP fraud because affordability. You had Besant come out and say, we're going to go into the money going into SNAP because of affordability. You had everyone, if they could, hitting affordability. I think the only one, no, even RFK did it. Even RFK got into affordability because he talked about the prior consent about prescription or health insurers. The gap between your doctor telling you what you need as a procedure and then your insurance company, prior authorization, your insurance company saying they'll pay for it. He said Americans are going to find out in the doctor's office if their insurance company is going to pay for it. That'll bring down costs, blah, blah, blah. So you saw him get his entire cabinet to focus their talking points around the affordability word, right? And so that's just a great tactic, first of all, but it's along the lines of what you're talking about. He's got everyone in that cabinet meeting talking about it. He's got everyone talking about SNAP and security and immigration. It all comes back to affordability because that is really the word that moves the needle right now. And Mamdani was 100%, super talented and skilled by embracing that. But you're seeing Trump show his skill and talent in stealing the word, like he did with fake news. Fake news, remember, was originally the media going after him.
Right. And the art of the deal is a direct lift from Roy Cohn, who was his mentor as he was emerging through the New York, real estate scene. So this is very on brand for Trump. And I got to give him credit. He knows what those trending words and topics are that America just latches onto. Affordability is definitely one that I think we can all agree on right now, but you've seen it in past elections. He's hammering home Kamala doesn't care about you. She cares about they, them. He is a marketing genius in some respects, but not surprising. Yeah.
The greatest marketing genius.
All right, moving on to the next one. Yeah, and he's unintentionally hilarious too, which really is confusing for me internally. But we'll move on to the next story here. So Republicans, Nolan, narrowly held on to the House seat in Tennessee in a district where Donald Trump won by nearly 40 points in 2016. The Republican candidate, Matt Van Epps, beat Democrat Afton Bain by only about 9 points. Now, that swing is what has everyone talking right now. This is the third straight special election in a deep red district where Democrats have massively overperformed their previous margins. Republicans are reminding everyone that a win is still a win. But under the surface, the math here is hard to ignore. There are roughly 100 House districts where Trump's 2024 margin was smaller than this Tennessee seat. So Democrats only need to flip a handful of them to take back the House and box in Trump for the final 2 years of his term. The current Republican majority is razor thin at 220 to 214, with 2 likely Democratic seats still vacant and another coming open in Georgia after Marjorie Taylor Greene's resignation. If this Tennessee result becomes the pattern instead of the exception, 2026 turns into a national referendum on Trump all over again. And both sides know that in a closely divided House, a handful of nervous suburban voters can matter more than a giant campaign rally. Bringing Nolan back. Nolan, this Tennessee district moved from a 40-point Trump win to a 9-point margin for the Republican candidate. What kinds of underlying forces can create such a dramatic swing in what used to be a reliably deep red seat?
Well, I think you have to go back to Trump's original appearance on the scene and to understand what's going on in this election in Tennessee. The original instantiation of Trump in Republican politics is as an anti-Republican. There's people who will always love Trump for what he did to the Bushes, for what he did to the McCains, for what he did to the Republican Party to destroy it. Because there's a lot of people on the MAGA side that absolutely hate the Republican Party. And to this day, you get Jim Jordan and all these people. They don't really mind being in opposition. It's an easy job. You get to say, "Oh, I would have done it sooner." You can say that every day.
Right.
They can just come out, "I would have done it sooner. They didn't go fast enough. I would have done it. That's a bad way to do it." So the job is so easy. You get to go to your meetings. You get to go to the fancy places still. You don't have to answer questions. You get to use the same talking points every day. And there is sort of a born loser attitude inside of the GOP, inside of the Republican Party, that doesn't really want to do the hard things. And that's what Trump really changed inside the Republican Party. So when people say there is no Republican Party, there's only Trump, that's true. The Republican Party is absolutely dead. If they don't have Trump out front, it's a zero. Now, MAGA, the thing inside of it, could find another heir apparent, but this guy was not a MAGA guy. He was not someone out there calling people garbage or retards or anything like that. So it wasn't really resonating. The girl, on the other hand, had hilarious campaign stuff that came out. So she definitely got her name out there, not for what you would think are bad reasons, right? So Republicans say, look how stupid she is, but she got name recognition because of it. And a lot of people said, I don't care if she's stupid. I don't care. She hates Trump. That's good enough, because you do have this heavy polarization thing going on, right? And so when she came out and did that, she got her name out there. So she actually improved her odds by saying she hates Nashville, she hates Tennessee, she doesn't like country music, she doesn't like hillbillies, and all of the things that they caught her on video saying. So indeed, the Republican Party is probably dead meat without Trump, or without an heir apparent inside of the system. But I will also say the Democrats are in their same sort of circling the drain, right? The Republicans and Democrats, both political parties, are facing an existential crisis. Both of them might not survive this. I don't think, for example, if Mamdani and AOC continue to rule the roost over in the Democrat Party, if the Democrat Party will look the same going forward. It will be something completely different. So I could imagine, just like if you'd have had a Democrat election and this Afton Bain, I would put her in the group of the Mamdanis. I don't know what her ideas are, but just by her, the way she does media, I would put her into the AOC camp. I'm not sure if she's a socialist or anything like that. But, if you'd have run a kind of a Hakeem Jeffries style or Schumer style candidate or Pelosi style candidate, they'd have had no take in this election either, because the traditional parties are losing amplification, and someone will be able to take the energy of Trump that he leaves behind when he's gone. Will MAGA harness it? Will the Mamdanis and the Social Democrats be able to harness it? We're not sure, but the old political parties, not so much. So what you saw here was a little bit of the new stuff with this girl and the Mamdani thing combining versus a bit of the old Republican Party. So indeed, the Republican Party is existentially threatened by no Trump. But so is the Democrat Party.
Yeah, no, it's interesting to see how much these political parties over the years have evolved into something that doesn't look anything like where they began. So it's really an interesting fabric here. And this now third special election, where this is the third special election where Democrats have dramatically overperformed in solid Republican districts. Now, when repeated swings appear like this, Nolan, how do you distinguish between random political noise and the early stages of genuine realignment here?
We can't right now because there is a lack. I wouldn't say in these early times it's really a sign one way or the other, because there's still so many factors that are going to come into the 2026 campaign. How much does Trump want to get involved, for example? If he gets involved and suddenly Elon shows up and you get the whole band back together, well, they're going to have a good time, right? People love seeing them. It's a big, festival when they're together. So that's a part of it. And then there's the people we don't see coming, right? There's always these new people that come out. But the most important one is going to be what Trump is doing with the filibuster. That's why you can't really look at much of election stuff until we see what will happen with the filibuster. Because the point of the filibuster, if you saw Trump tweeted about it yesterday, he said, go for the filibuster now. And the reason Trump is going so hard on filibuster, so the filibuster rule, of course, some things require a 60-40 split in the Senate. Other things are a 51-49 vote. The 60-40 are the big changes like electoral college or voting. Electoral college would be constitutional, but voting permissions, let's say, the no ID voting. So the point of the filibuster, the point of breaking the filibuster, taking the 60-40 Senate split down to the 51-49 simple majority, is to implement voter ID. If voter ID comes, that affects particularly municipalities, because municipalities are generally a jurisdiction that just lets anyone vote, because you don't need to be a citizen to vote in municipal elections, right? You can be a taxpayer of a city, because they're not really constitutional. They're a product of the states themselves. So they're just legal constructs. So it's like, a non-American can vote on the board of a company. A non-American can vote for a mayor of a city, because they're not really embedded in the foundation of America, so citizenship isn't an issue. So because of that little delta between municipal small things and the kind of voter ID requirements that you see out there, you understand why Trump is doing it. We've seen the data come out of Minneapolis and Minnesota, for example. Many non-citizens registered to vote. We've seen it throughout the system, all kinds of the stuff we saw from Elon Musk and the way he used AI to get into the voting patterns and voting. We saw a lot of non-citizens voted. A lot of people, when I was living in the United States, I was not a citizen in 2020. It's one of the reasons why I left. I was sent 5 ballots to my house in Brooklyn, and I said, there isn't a single eligible voter here. And so I used to tell people all the time, I voted for Biden 5 times because it was going to be good for Bitcoin. And people would say 5 times. And I said, well, yeah, it's good for Bitcoin, right? A credible election is not good for Bitcoin. An incredible election that no one believes is right on, right? We want Joe Biden did a great service to the idea of the president being the leader of the free world. He kind of collapsed the whole notion. Trump got it started, but Biden really did a number on it. So, the idea.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned. Go ahead.
Yeah, just the idea of election systems, and that'll be the biggest wild card for the 2026 midterms. If voter ID and the paper ballots, the day of voting, if all of that becomes reality, it'll be, first of all, hard to predict exactly how the elections go. My instinct says they'll go heavy Republican if he gets his way. And that'll be that,
Hey, whatever is good for Bitcoin, right? And I'm glad he actually brought that up, because our next story directly ties into that. Because as you guys remember at home, Harvard made their allocation into Bitcoin earlier this year at about $500 million worth, in fact. However, their current position is down more than 20% this quarter after the university dramatically increased its holdings in the iShares Bitcoin Trust. Now, Bitcoin's broader downturn is dragging the position into what analysts estimate could be double-digit paper losses. So here's what's going on. Harvard bought 4.9 million shares of BlackRock's Bitcoin ETF last quarter, a position that would have cost around $294 million if purchased at the quarter's low. Now, those same shares are now worth roughly $255 million, meaning the oldest and wealthiest university in America managed to scale Bitcoin at almost the exact Wrong moment. Now, this is only 1% of Harvard's $57 billion endowment, so financially it's barely a bruise, but symbolically it matters a lot. Because when Harvard's endowment is holding Bitcoin next to municipal bonds and timberland, it shows exactly how deep institutional adoption has gone. Brown University reported 14 million in Bitcoin ETF exposure. Emory reported 52 million. Now, the real story is that major universities are allocating real capital into Bitcoin during bull cycles and still holding during corrections, even when timing makes them look like they've took advice from Reddit. Now, Harvard's timing may be bad, but the direction of travel hasn't changed. Institutions are already here, and most of them aren't planning on leaving. Bringing Nolan back. Nolan, Harvard scaled into nearly $500 million of Bitcoin exposure, only to see it drop more than 20% this quarter. What does this tell you about the learning curve traditional institutions still face when they enter Bitcoin for the first time?
I think they're banking on their much deeper understanding of markets than us pleb Bitcoiners. I mean, the Bitcoin price is being heavily manipulated right now. The JP Morgan FUD against MicroStrategy. I mean, just go back to the October 10th Binance story, right? From there, you've got 30% drawdown, the MSTR FUD starts. Then you start getting all these new collateralized products come out from JP Morgan, and then Vanguard opens its ETF business, all at the same time. What a coincidence. What amazing timing. Just incredible how they did it. So Harvard has those conversations. So in my mind, the people at Harvard looked over at their buddy and went, what's this all about? And they went, it's fine. We're just shaking out the old Bitcoiners, stealing their Bitcoin. Don't worry about it. We're going to the moon. And the Harvard guys go, okay. Yeah. So the learning curve is the same as it ever was. They look over at their buddy who knows what's going on. 30% downturn in markets. Hodl, you'll be fine. And they went, yeah, sure, we'll be fine.
Right.
If they panic sold, it would surprise me. But that's not what's happened. You know, you can even go with Emory. Emory, that was donated to them by a big Bitcoin whale who graduated from there. Most of it was anyway. And so these guys are just saying, oh, cool. You know, I got a missionary Bitcoiner giving me Bitcoin. And I'd say it's the same story. I don't know how the Harvard transaction went down, but you can imagine there's someone there who's been in Bitcoin for a while. It's probably a little psycho, right? We know the type. And they're like, it's fine. So they have great advice. I'm sure they're doing fine. I doubt anyone in Harvard is sitting there going, the Bitcoin, what happened? I got scammed.
Right.
They're fine. They're going to get over it. So it's just typical Wall Street. They're enjoying their manipulation. In the same way that Bitcoiners like when the price dips, they can get it cheaper, right? That's the same idea. So they're saying discount. They probably were all Black Friday at Harvard. Black Friday, Bitcoin sale is on. So these guys learn quick.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think from a public perception, at least, to me, it inspires confidence that we're seeing premier universities in the United States openly allocate parts of their treasury to Bitcoin. You hear Harvard, top university, they got to be pretty smart. They must know what they're doing. So now we don't just have Harvard, though. We got Brown and Emory all openly holding Bitcoin along bonds, real estate, and timberland. What message does that send to the rest of the financial world about where Bitcoin now sits on the institutional spectrum, that we have universities like Harvard and Emory even jumping in the pool?
Well, and universities are effectively, they follow the leader. They're not so much brave as they are when one outlier goes, they all go. And I think I remember it was a famous quote, I think, when they were getting Bitwise going. It was either Hunter Horsley who said it, one of the founders of Bitwise, but it ended up being a quote for a couple of years in Bitcoin. Maybe you remember it. It was around from like 2017 to 2019, and it was the answer to the question, when are the university institutions and endowments going to buy Bitcoin? And his answer was, once Harvard does, because they're all going to follow. He said Harvard or Yale.
Yeah.
Right? Once Harvard or Yale does it, they all kind of follow. And I think that's what we're talking about here. Not that I'm a mind reader, but from what I've seen from Wall Street, having worked there, there's definitely a hierarchy of importance. There's a sort of JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, and the institutional side. And just like at Harvard, there's Harvard. Just like in universities, there's Harvard and Yale. And that's where a lot of these people come from, right? If you read Liar's Poker, the great Michael Lewis book about 1980s and 1990s Wall Street, that was why it's called Liar's Poker, because he's like, I went to Princeton, I did an art history degree, I had no idea what I was doing, and I felt like a phony every single day because they kept paying me money and I didn't know what it was for. I had no idea what I was doing. That's why he called this book Liar's Poker, and he was
Yeah.
talking about how they all function on this sort of follow the leader principle. That's the book that made Michael Lewis,
Yeah.
right? That's before he did all the stuff that came after Moneyball and all the others. But that was his first big hit. And it was really that story. It was really how they don't know what they're doing. What they do is they look over, and if the fancy rich guy does something, they go, "Oh, I'm going to do what the fancy rich guy does." And it's not deeper than that. That was kind of the shocking thing of
Yeah.
Liar's Poker, was that they're not that smart. It's let's look at this and then we'll go with it.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of feels like that in a lot of sectors, right? Like nobody wants to be the first mover. They're looking for someone else to kind of grant them permission to do it. And I kind of feel like the United States, in a lot of ways, is the Harvard of sovereign nation Bitcoin allocation. Once the United States actually comes out and says we are actively buying it, that kind of gives permission to the rest of the world that you can do that and not be publicly castrated for doing something that many years ago people would have said you're crazy to do. And we're seeing that in institutions. We're seeing that here in the United States, I think, eventually. And that brings us to our final question of the morning, Nolan, and we'll try to finish this one up in the next minute or two. Institutions entered Bitcoin during the bull run, and they're still holding during this correction. At least a lot of them are. What does that tell you about where Bitcoin sits on its global adoption timeline and how close we might be to it becoming a standard allocation going forward?
I think we're there. I think the signals from the administration and from these large financiers, the JP Morgans. I mean, I think I saw yesterday Goldman Sachs paid $2 billion just to buy a hedge fund to get more or less just a bit of access to liquidity and some counterparties and some customer acquisition. It was not like I never even heard of this company. And I know most of these big players. So they paid $2 billion for a Bitcoin hedge fund. Like, what are you talking about? So what I see
Yeah.
from JP Morgan and from some of this messaging is that's what's going on. The big companies are in. We're seeing systemic change. We're hearing it message from the Secretary of the Treasury. The Fed Reserve is losing its position in the system. Bitcoin looks like it's taking over that position. So it's a big deal that America's doing it, and I think you're going to see the Wall Street institutions continue to follow suit.
The future is now, and we're living it, baby. And Nolan, we always appreciate having you on the show. So as always, thank you for sharing your insights and expertise with us. It is always a treat to have you here on the Blockchain Report. And for those of you at home, make sure to check out Nolan on X, account BTC. He's got some of the best takes in the business. And check out his own show, The Great Awakening, on before the Blockchain Report each and every day. What is it? What is the timing on that workout? Is that like 8 or 9 p.m. or 9 a.m. Eastern?
Yeah, 9 a.m. Eastern to 11 a.m. Eastern, just in time to come meet you. And I'll see you again tomorrow, Hank.
Can't wait, buddy. Thanks so much for your time, and we'll see you mañana. All right, we're going to take a quick break here at the Blockchain Report, but when we're back, we got more of today's top news stories you are not going to want to miss, and we're going to be doing some chart talk with the man himself, our own crypto wunderkind and resident chart shark, Luca Pagano. So stay tuned. We'll be back with more right after this quick break.
Oh, it's beautiful, Hank. This is not financial advice.
All right, and we're back this morning with one of my favorite people in the world, our resident chart shark, Luca Pagano. Luca, how are you today? Happy Wednesday. Thanks for joining us.
Hey Hank, how's it going? It's a pleasure to be here, man.
Oh, it's a pleasure to have you here, Luca. The markets have been interesting the last couple of weeks. We saw us dive down back to the low mid 80s, but in the last couple of really hours, last 24 hours, we've seen a surge back to the 90s again. I think we're currently sitting around 92, 93. Help us, Luca. What is going on right now with the Bitcoin price? Why have we seen this jump? And what are you expecting going forward through the rest of December? Q4 was supposed to be fireworks, but so far it's been a little underwhelming. What are you seeing and what are you expecting as we move on through the end of the year?
Yeah, I mean, I think, November definitely sort of caught us in a surprise, because, well, you've got all this quantitative easing and lowering of the rates and everything that should help the global, markets. basically be more risk on, but then you have
Yeah.
all the tension and the overextension and everything that sort of makes us be where we're at right now. So I think honestly, Hank, we're at a pretty interesting point in terms of Bitcoin, specifically because you've got all these. You already retraced uh up to this week. The low of this week is pretty much 40% since highs, which is an interesting point to be considering pullbacks in a potential bull market. Of course, the question is if we are or not in a bull market. I don't try to guess if we're on or off a bull market. Let's just see the charts together, Hank, if it's good for you, and we will try to depict where
Yeah.
we're at or where we could go together. Of course, guys, as you always know, it's not financial advice. This is just me thinking out loud and trying to win some shekels. Trying to see where Bitcoin can land. But basically, we're here looking at a weekly. And in terms of a weekly, I think you've got this structure where we got a higher high here, right? And definitely higher lows. We didn't break that yet, which is I think one of the most interesting things. Since the start of the trend, like uh, I think it helps us, uh, understand market structure. Have higher lows, higher highs, higher lows, right? Higher than this one, higher highs, higher lows, and we are still at higher lows, right? The thing is, if we're gonna make sort of a lower high here, which would position us maybe at a potential head and shoulders and things going much uglier, right? We can also break this structure into lower lows right now and see a higher low then here. For example, this is the things I'm looking at honestly, like where we're at. Why is this a green zone for me, Hank? This is a green zone for me because this is Fibonacci's between 38 and 50% retrace, which has been always a great buying opportunity, to be honest with you. We've been talking on the show on Monday with Borja on the state of Bitcoin markets, and we were looking at as this as a potential pivot into probably like 90, 97, 98, $100,000. Like I generally like I see that bounce as a good possibility, to be honest with you. But right now we're at resistance of the bounce. Like, what do I expect here, Hank, or what would I love to see? Like, if we reject here, I will be eyeing again into the 80 low 80s and potentially into this low at 74. If we can close above 92, 93, I would love for us to go to 97, 98, 100. That's at least like what I'm eyeing here on the weekly and on the daily charts.
Yeah, I would love to see 100. If anyone's getting Christmas presents this year for me, it's because Bitcoin is back over 100. Otherwise, sorry guys, you're out of luck. But one thing about Bitcoin that you and I both know, Luca, is that people often say history doesn't repeat, but it does rhyme. So how is this, what's supposed to be a bear market year for Bitcoin, match up with previous cycles that we've seen? Is this relatively on the same pace, or due to all of the new factors we've seen enter the space in the last year, specifically, a lot of tailwinds from the government, the United States government specifically? We've seen a lot of institutional money come into play. Is this deviating from what we've seen in previous cycles, or are we on a similar course that we've seen in the past? How do those match up right now?
Well, I mean, I totally get it. In terms of this cycle, what is really different from past pullbacks, and we gotta mention this because I think it's pretty relevant. Like, since the beginning of the cycle, what is quite relevant is we broke for the first time the 20 moving average weekly, right? So I think like this is very interesting because since we came up, since we broke this on March of 2023, starting let's say we could give this as the initiation of the bull market, we never broke down,
Yeah.
basically, right? We always pulled back and we went down. That's why, honestly, like $100,000 with the confluence of the psychological level, and you've got this previous resistance that was support. This was a great level, honestly, to try to buy in terms of probabilities, and we broke down it. We definitely confirmed here something special, look at the reaction we had actually on the 50 moving average weekly, right? Which is very interesting for me. That's why I thought this was a great level as well, and that's why I think honestly that we could definitely bounce into that area which we were mentioning of $100,000, right? Because it's basically where the moving average is at right now. We could see it at $98,000 more or less, but the thing is here, Hank, talking about cycles, yeah, this could be definitely one of those deeper pullbacks that we're used to seeing, and we could restart this. We can, but it's also true, and we got to stay aware of that, Hank, that it is a pretty tough environment which we have to take care of. I think one of the most important things that we're gonna see the following weeks, if we are given, is what the reaction goes on this, like such high such high offer and such high resistance level of the 98 to $100,000 to see where we're at in the coming month, right?
Yeah. And I think one question in everyone's mind, Luca, is, we live in this world right now of extreme polarity. People want to know the best case and worst case scenarios because we find comfort in the middle. So right now, as we enter the end of the year and we wrap up Q4, which traditionally is a bullish quarter for Bitcoin, even though we saw in November that was very uncharacteristic, what are kind of your bearish and bullish cases for Bitcoin's price action by the end of the year, if you're looking at the charts right now? Structurally, where do you think those could be? I'm not asking you to tell us the future per se, but what are kind of the two levels that we could potentially reach on both the high end and on the low end based on what you're currently seeing?
Yeah. I mean, my best bet, let's say, for the end of the year, I expect more of a sideways action in terms of prices. Like, I would be pretty comfy and not surprised at all if we're ranging from the lows of this week till the highs of the $90,000. Like, I would bet on that range, to be honest. But if we see a lower case scenario, I would definitely be eyeing the $74,000, honestly. And on a high scenario, I find it difficult for us to break up, but it would be an amazing news if we could end the year above $100,000. For me, that would be the confirmation that we're still on definitely a bull market. That's my view, at least.
Right. What do you think would need to happen for us to experience a price above 100K again? Would we need some macro factors to change? For instance, would something like maybe actual peace between Ukraine and Russia serve as a catalyst that would allow people to invest more money into what they consider risk-on assets? Is that something that might need to happen in order for us to realistically break that six-figure mark again? Or, I know they're saying right now, additionally, that it looks like those prediction markets are saying that we likely will get another rate cut this year. So are we kind of just trading sideways, waiting for some good news to happen and for people are, going to be comfortable taking Bitcoin to that next leg up?
Yeah, I think the global U.S. equities and environment helps a lot if we are risk on. Like, I think yesterday we had a great day on the SPY and also on the NASDAQ, which also helped momentum. Bitcoin has been a little bit more of an over exaggeration to the downside on the last couple of weeks, which I think is important to notice because it could either mean that it knows something that the rest doesn't, or that actually we're a bit more like weak in terms of the equities. But what I would expect to happen for us to break that, Hank, would be definitely an all-time highs on the equities market. Because for me that's a view of that we're on risk on, and that Bitcoin definitely is undervalued in terms of general correlation, with the markets. So right. That would be interesting to follow up, but definitely good weeks to explore opportunities, Hank, on a good pullback that we've been having, the latest weeks.
Yeah, definitely a good time to stuff some Bitcoin in your stocking before it gets over 6 digits again. And who knows, that might be the last time, but we said that before. So there's a lot to be written here in the story in the rest of the year, and I'll be very curious to see how it plays out. But I certainly appreciate you dropping in, Luca, and lending your insight and expertise to us, and we really appreciate it. And for those in our audience that haven't got enough yet of the Luca hot takes, what's the best place I can send them to get more?
Yeah, I mean, you can send them to look at Roxom, and we'll try to keep on the ongoing analysis, Hank. And, it's always great to be here. So thank you for having me, and hope to see you next time,
Absolutely. Pleasures are all ours. Thanks, Luca. See you next time, bud.
Bye-bye.
All right, gang, it's time to get into more of today's top stories in our continued bull run. So let's run the stinger and get into it. Well, it looks like Donald Trump is talking about his health again, and this time the headline is that he has no idea what part of his body his recent MRI scanned, but he's confident it wasn't the brain. Speaking to reporters aboard Air Force One on November 30th, as he flew back to Washington from Florida, Trump was asked about imaging he received at Walter Reed on October 10th. Now, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz had publicly dared him to release the MRI results after Trump aimed a slur at him in a Thanksgiving post on Truth Social. Trump told reporters he'd be happy to release the perfect results of his last physical and said, if you want to have it released, I'll release it. Now, when CBS News' Weijia Jiang, who also serves as president of the White House Correspondents Association, asked what part of the body was scanned, Trump replied, I have no idea. It wasn't the brain because I took a cognitive test and I aced it. Of course he did. Now, I got a perfect mark, which you would be incapable of doing. The comment fits a long-standing pattern here. You see, Trump has repeatedly used personal insults when responding to questions about his health or mental fitness, while emphasizing that he's in excellent or exceptional condition. The current White House physician, Dr. Sean Barbella, said Trump's October exam included lab testing, advanced imaging, and preventative health assessments, and described his laboratory results as exceptional, claiming Trump's cardiac age is about 14 years younger than his actual age. Now, the doctor also said Trump remains in exceptional health and maintains a demanding schedule without restrictions, even as he was recently diagnosed with chronic venous insufficiency in July. Presidential physical exams have become heavily politicized as voters scrutinize age and fitness more than ever, and Trump's mix of bravado, partial disclosure, and sharp jabs at questioners fits neatly into that new reality. Now, he's signaling that he's fine, that the tests were perfect, and that anyone doubting that will be met with jokes and counterpunches rather than, extra details. And in other news, shares of American Bitcoin Corp, the mining company co-founded by Eric Trump, fell more than 50% in under 30 minutes once restricted shares were free to trade. The stock triggered multiple trading halts as sellers rushed to exit the moment the lockup expired. Here's the full picture. These newly unlocked shares came from a private placement tied to American Bitcoin's merger with Griffin Digital Mining, and early investors wasted no time taking profits. The stock eventually settled down at 35%, erasing months of gains and extending a slide that had already pushed the company more than 60% off its September peak. Now, that drawdown is happening alongside a broader crypto market downturn, with Bitcoin still more than 20% below its October high as macro pressures hit risk assets across the board. Eric Trump posted on X that he's holding all of my shares and is 100% committed, which may calm some nerves, but doesn't change the reality that unlock events in crypto-linked stocks almost always create volatility. Now, more unlocks are scheduled for 2026, and analysts are warning investors to expect choppy trading around each event. Hut 8, which still owns a majority stake, dropped 15% on the day. Now, American Bitcoin actually reported a profitable quarter with $64 million in revenue and $3.5 million in net income. But fundamentals don't stand a chance when a wave of newly eligible sellers enters all at once. The company insists nothing about its operations have changed. The market, for now, is reacting to supply pressure, not their strategy. And new ADP payroll data shows that the U.S. private sector lost 32,000 jobs in November, largely driven by steep cuts at small businesses. Now, establishments with fewer than 50 employees shed an estimated 120,000 jobs, the sector's worst performance in more than 2 years. Here are what the numbers actually revealed. Medium and large businesses added jobs, 51,000 and 39,000 respectively, but it wasn't enough to offset the collapse among smaller firms. Economists had expected job growth of around 40,000, making this report a significant downside surprise. ADP's data doesn't always align perfectly with the official government jobs figures, but because the federal shutdown has delayed the release of core labor data, reports like this are carrying more weight than usual. Now, small businesses are being hit hardest by a mix of higher borrowing costs, persistent inflation, and erratic consumer spending. Many are slowing hiring, cutting hours, or closing entirely. The labor market overall has been softening for 6 months, and job losses in November marked the largest decline since mid of 2022. ADP analysts describe the small businesses as starting to crack, which is not the kind of phrase markets like hearing right before the holiday retail season. The government's official jobs report has already been postponed until December, mid-December, because of shutdown-related disruptions. You remember that. Now, when it finally arrives, analysts expect it to confirm a cooling labor market, though how much cooling remains to the big question. For now, this is another sign that the era of nonstop job growth is fading, and the slowdown is hitting the smallest employers first. And a new survey shows that most American millionaires no longer feel wealthy. According to Northwestern Mutual's latest study, only 36% of people with over $1 million in investable assets consider themselves wealthy. Everyone else feels like they are still grinding. Wealth advisors say that it comes down to context. $1 million stretches in West Virginia a lot more than in New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco, or any large coastal city where rent looks like a typo. And when everyday millionaires spend their time around people worth over 5 or 10 million bucks, they start feeling broke in very expensive clothes. The U.S. now has nearly 24 million millionaires, and America added more than 1,000 of them per day in 2024. That sounds impressive until you remember how much life costs. A recent report estimates that the full American dream, we're talking home, retirement, kids, college, cars, vacations, healthcare, pets, and a wedding, now runs about $5 million over time, so I'm screwed. Now, other surveys say it takes about 2.3 million to actually feel wealthy and around 800,000 to feel financially comfortable. Meanwhile, a third of six-figure earners told pollsters they feel financially distressed, and most say that six-figure income is no longer a sign of security. 3/4 of them recently used a credit card because they were short on cash. So you end up with millionaires worried about outliving their savings and high earners living paycheck to paycheck, all staring at the same inflation charts. Now, for many people, wealth is starting to mean less about hitting a magic number and more about one simple question. Do you control your time, or does your bank account control you? And in a fun story, a raccoon in Virginia broke into a closed liquor store over Thanksgiving weekend. Officers say the raccoon fell through a ceiling tile, tore through the store, and helped itself to various liquors before losing consciousness. Here's where it gets even more unbelievable. Staff discovered broken bottles, liquor pooled across the floor, and one very, very intoxicated raccoon wedged between the toilet and a trash bin like it had been working through a week-long bender. Its drink of choice appears to have been scotch. Classy raccoon. Now, officers transported the raccoon to a local animal shelter for questioning, which is government speak for we needed to let this thing sleep it off. After a few hours of rest and zero injuries, the raccoon was released back into the wild. The only evidence from the break-in is a single blurry CCTV frame, which means authorities will be relying heavily on the raccoon's memory, which unfortunately was marinated in bottom shelf liquor. The store jokingly thanked the shelter for giving their masked bandit a sober ride home, which is more dignity than most humans get after a night like that. It's currently unclear how much the raccoon actually drank, but based on the wreckage, it approached the situation with the commitment of someone who believes prohibition might return at any moment. Officer Martin summed it up by saying, "It was just another day in animal control," which raises the concerning possibility that this is not even their strangest case yet. We're taking a quick break, but when we're back, more Blockchain Report coming your way, so stay tuned. We'll be back right after this.
Some call me Chicken Little, others Bubble Boy. I'm a bit changed, but sounds familiar, right? Let me tell you a hard truth. The S&P isn't rising, the dollar's falling. That's the trick, monopoly money. It's ice melting by the second. Your savings, your salary, your time. Worth less every second. Everyone's using the wrong measuring stick. Switch the denominator. Price the S&P into Bitcoin. Hard, fixed, unprintable. Suddenly your unstoppable index is collapsing. And while you cling to dollars, well, Wall Street already switched. Before, you needed 2 brokers.
Still getting my ninja bonus though, right?
Fuck. Plenty of spreadsheets. And my quant!
I hate this part.
I was right, and I'll be right again. If I were you, I'd thank me.
You know my name's Dave, right?
Security matters. Zappo Bank. The only way to bank your Bitcoin. Apply now at zappobank.com.
Wish you could grab cash without selling your Bitcoin? Yeah, same. But hey, that's why Ledden exists. They're the global leader in Bitcoin-backed loans. We're talking over $9 billion issued since 2018 with a perfect record protecting client assets. Now you might be asking, Hank, what makes a Ledden loan different? Well, with custody loans, your collateral, it stays put. They don't go full degen and lend it out for yield. There are no credit checks. It funds in under 6 hours. No monthly payments. You can repay anytime with 0 penalties. And for transparency that grown-ups actually want, proof of reserves reports every 6 months verified by a top accounting firm. The bottom line here is Ledden lets Bitcoin holders unlock liquidity without selling. And you can check them out over at ledden.io/RoxomTV. That's LEDN.io/RoxomTV. All right, it's time for our market rundown. How is Bitcoin faring today? Well, currently we're right around that 92.5 mark, which is a very kind departure from what we've seen as of late. We've been kind of waiting around in the doldrums of the mid-80s, but we've seen a bit of an uptick. It looks like there might be some good macro news on the horizon. It appears that these prediction markets are saying that it's very likely that we do get an additional basis point cut from the Fed this month, which I certainly think is piquing people's spirits up in the holiday season. And with hopefully a conclusion to the Ukraine and Russia war on the horizon, I think we're seeing a lot of optimism start to find its way back into the market, which is only going to be a good thing for prices going forward, Bitcoin and elsewhere. But right now, I want to dig into what actual Bitcoin holders are doing behind the scenes. So let's bring up our charts here and get into it this morning, okay? Because the price right now is hanging around that $92,000, $93,000 range, but underneath that, the different wallet groups are behaving like they're watching totally different movies. Some are terrified, some are scooping everything in sight. So today we're going to walk through who's selling, who's buying, and what it might mean heading into 2026. So this first chart, okay, this is our retail holder chart. These are people that have balances of Bitcoin less than 100 Bitcoin, usually 10 to 100, okay? So let's start with them, the retail crowd. This is the shrimps, the crabs, and the fish, and specifically the fish cohort, which are people in that 10 to 100 Bitcoin range. They have made the biggest move as of late. And when you look at this chart, check out this massive dip we're seeing right here, okay? There's a big dip. Look at that, guys. Is this working on my screen here? Okay, it's on the right side of the screen. I don't think my pen is working. Let's see, gonna do it with my finger. There we go, works with my finger. We can see that massive dip there, okay? Labeled at negative 101K Bitcoin. This is more than 101,000 Bitcoin leaving their wallets. And that's not, oh, people trimmed a little. That's a wave of fear selling. Shrimps sold about 2,000 Bitcoin. The crabs sold about 7,000, so across the board, retail is definitely pulling back. But here's the weird part. Price of Bitcoin is still going up. So clearly someone bigger is stepping in to catch all of this. And that brings us to chart number 2. Okay, this is our chart showing our sharks. Okay, these are people in the 100 to 1,000 Bitcoin range. That's what we're looking at now. If we can bring that one up here, gang, all right? So the first group here is doing exactly that. That is the sharks. Can we get this new one up here, guys? So I can show it here, please. So the first group, again, is doing that, and this is the sharks we're looking at. This is people in the 100 to 1,000 Bitcoin range. And you can see the spike here, right? Right there, all right? So they added over 67,000 Bitcoin. That alone cancels out most of the retail selling we saw. Now, this group usually moves early when sentiment is shifting. They're not emotional. They accumulate when the smaller wallets are panicking. That brings us to chart 3. Our chart of the whales. We all know about the Bitcoin whales, okay? Now here's the curveball we're receiving from them. The regular whales, those are the people in the 1,000 to 10,000 Bitcoin wallet range, actually went the other direction, okay? And you can see this dip right here that says negative 34K Bitcoin. They sold 34,000 Bitcoin, so now we've got retail selling, mid-sized whales selling, yet the price is still going up. So again, somebody even bigger has to be on the other end of this thing, which brings us to chart number 4, all right? So this chart here is the mega whales and exchanges. So these are wallets with over 10,000 Bitcoin, okay? So this is the absolute top of the food chain we're seeing here. And you can see this 90K Bitcoin spike on the right side. The whales added more than 90,000 BTC, and that wipes out all the selling from retail, all the selling from mid whales, and all the new Bitcoin that's being issued. These guys basically vacuumed the entire market. And this is the kind of accumulation you see when deeply informed players believe the price is too low, even if it doesn't feel that way to the average person buying their first $50 on Cash App. So what is the big takeaway from all of this, right? Well, here are what the numbers are telling me right now. It really appears that retail is scared. They're freaked out, they're dumping. Mid-sized whales are mixed. Some are dumping, some are buying. But the institutions and the mega wallets are backing up the truck and loading up. There's an old saying, okay? Follow the smart money. And right now, the smart money is giving us a very loud clue about how they think 2026 is going to play out. So it's time for us to get excited. All right, we're taking a quick break here at the Blockchain Report, but when we're back, we got more of today's top news that you are not going to want to miss, so stay tuned. We'll be back with more right after this quick break. And welcome back. It's time for more of this morning's Bull Run. We go over the top stories of the day, so let's get back into it. The Trump administration is threatening to withhold federal food assistance funding from 21 states that are refusing to hand over detailed data on SNAP recipients. Now, the order demands states provide identifying information, including social security numbers and home addresses, so the USDA can investigate alleged fraud. So here's what's happening right now. Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rollins told the cabinet that states declining to share data would stop receiving SNAP administrative funds as soon as next week. Those states, mostly Democratic-led, argue the demand is an invasion of privacy and violates federal law. Now, multiple courts have so far agreed, issuing temporary orders blocking enforcement while lawsuits continue. Critics say the administration is using a nutrition program as leverage in a political and legal fight. Supporters say the data is necessary to prevent misuse and ensure benefits go to the right households. The stakes here are enormous. More than 41 million Americans rely on SNAP, and many states are already operating with strained budgets and growing demand. Any disruption in federal support could ripple through grocery budgets, food banks, and local safety nets almost immediately. The administration, meanwhile, insists fraud levels justify the data grab, citing a Government Accountability Office estimate showing about 11.7% of SNAP payments were improper in 2023. But GAO also clarified that many of those improper payments were simple processing errors, not fraud. Now, political leaders in the affected states say they're preparing for a prolonged fight. Legal experts say withholding funds could be ruled illegal, but the threat itself may already be altering state budget planning. Now, this is now one of the largest federal-state standoffs over food assistance in decades, and until a final ruling arrives, uncertainty is the only thing being reliably distributed here. And Michael and Susan Dell are making one of the largest private gifts in recent history, pledging $6.25 billion to seed investment accounts for 25 million children. At today's prices, that's roughly the value of 85,000 Bitcoin. Their contribution dramatically expands the new federal Trump Accounts program, which gives $1,000 to every newborn from 2025 to 2028. The Dell expansion adds children up to age 10 in zip codes with median household incomes under $150K. Now, to understand the scale, if the Dells pledge were invested in Bitcoin instead of traditional markets, the fund could explode in value. At $150,000 per Bitcoin, it would be worth about $12.7 billion. At $500,000, roughly $42 billion. And if Bitcoin ever reached $1 million, the total would top $85 billion, more than 10 times the original commitment. But none of that potential upside is available to participating families. By law, Trump accounts do not allow Bitcoin or any digital asset exposure. All funds must be placed in low-cost stock index funds until the child turns 18. Now, supporters say that protects families from volatility, while critics argue it locks low-income children out of one of the highest-performing assets of the past decade. Some analysts call the restriction outdated, noting that corporations, hedge funds, and even retirement accounts now hold Bitcoin, while a program designed to build generational wealth for kids prohibits it entirely. The Treasury Department is still finalizing registration and custodial details before the program launches next summer, and employers will be allowed to contribute up to $2,500 tax-free, and several major companies say they'll match the government's $1,000 deposit for newborns. So for the Dells, the goal here is pretty simple. Provide millions of kids with an early financial foothold, even as the debate grows over whether the program should allow families to choose assets like Bitcoin. And OpenAI CEO Sam Altman has told employees the company is launching a code red effort to improve ChatGPT as competition intensifies from Google and Anthropic. According to internal memos, OpenAI is pausing investments in several areas to focus resources directly on ChatGPT's capabilities and user experience. Now, here's why it matters. You see, Google's new Gemini 3 model has been widely praised and now powers features used by billions of people each month. Anthropic's Claude has seen explosive enterprise adoption with more than 300,000 business customers and rapid growth in six-figure contracts. This puts OpenAI, once the runaway leader, in a tightening race. The company now serves over 800 million weekly users, but rivals are catching up fast, and Google's AI integration into search is an unprecedented distribution. OpenAI's infrastructure expansion has raised some questions as well. The company has committed more than $1.4 trillion to long-term AI infrastructure partnerships, an amount so large it has sparked debate about feasibility, financing, and long-term strategy. Now, Altman insists the spending is necessary to build the next generation of AI systems and says revenue will scale accordingly. Still, the memo signals some real pressure. OpenAI's valuation has soared to roughly $500 billion, and expectations are now aligned with tech giants, not startups. So competitors, they sense opportunity here, and developers and enterprises are increasingly testing multiple models side by side, and loyalty in the AI industry is famously shallow. The company says it will roll out major upgrades to ChatGPT soon. Now, whether they arrive fast enough to hold off Google and Anthropic is becoming the defining question for one of the world's most influential tech firms. All right, we're taking a quick break, but when we're back, we got more Blockchain Report, including Scroll Patrol, where we check out what is currently trending on X, and we bring it to you live and in the moment, so stay tuned. More Blockchain Report coming your way right after this. Are you interested in effortlessly growing your Bitcoin portfolio? I sure am. And the Bitcoin credit card by Gemini earns you Bitcoin back on every purchase. You can use it like any credit card. Buy lunch, gas, your weekly groceries, and you earn up to 4% back instantly in Bitcoin or one of over 50 other cryptos straight to your account. All that with no annual fee, and right now, you can grab a $200 Bitcoin welcome bonus. It's the easiest way to start building your Bitcoin stack. Just go to Gemini.com to learn more.
You're up here, Hank.
All right, it is time for Scroll Patrol. Victor, what do you got on tap for us right now? Looks like Tesla Optimus robots, incredible progress after only 2.5 years. I don't like this, Victor. This is getting a little too close to all of the dystopian robot movies we're seeing, and we all know how those end. Are you okay with these robots roaming around amongst us? Because I'm sure not.
No, they're kind of creepy.
They're super creepy.
It reminds me of like the iRobot, right? That was a Will Smith movie.
It's just like iRobot. This is all too close. How we're not realizing this in real time is really alarming to me. Very scared about the future of humanity right now. Look at these guys. They don't feel, they just do. I don't like it. I've seen how that movie ends. It wasn't good. This is happening too fast.
Weren't they like helpers?
Well, they start as helpers, but you know, you have all these robots kind of similar to Tesla's, right? They all like kind of report to this central like mega mind, right? And you have all of that collective information and they're getting it all the time. Just imagine like the info that is going to be collected constantly, and then if one of these AIs turn rogue on us, we're screwed. It's total bubkiss. I don't like it. This is how the beginning of the world ends, and we're seeing it right in front of us. And we're telling Elon it's okay. I don't like it. What do we got next? I'm getting nervous with these guys.
Apple Music and Spotify released their Wrapped at the end of the year with their top music or top song.
I saw mine. It was really embarrassing. How did yours turn out this year?
Oh, what was it? I haven't checked mine.
Oh, I don't think I can. Let's just put it this way. One of my top songs of the year is a fake song from a comedic movie about a fake pop star. That's how embarrassing my list is this year. My friend showed me his and I was like, bro, Sabrina Carpenter was your number 3. And then I looked at mine and I was like, check that. Mine's somehow even worse than yours. So I usually don't make mine public for these, but it's fun. Do you do the Spotify rap thing? Like it is a fun little thing to do.
I do, yeah, but I haven't checked. But I feel like it's just gonna be Lady Gaga the whole thing. So
it's Gaga, probably some Foster the People. You know, I know your music. You and I cross over on Foster the People. That's how we bonded when we first started the show, though. So I respect it. Yeah. All right, what else we got? We had Spotify
and then,
rap.
This last one is just some cool waves from Portugal.
Some cool waves from Portugal. Let's see. I'm not seeing them on my screen here.
Look at those waves. Do you see them?
No, it's all like scrambly here. Let's see. Maybe it's on here. Oh yeah. Okay, I can see those. That's beautiful. Portugal's the best. If there was like a foreign country that I moved to, I think it would be Portugal. I don't know if you've ever been. It's like Spain, but like way cheaper and way more beautiful. It's the most beautiful place I've ever been to. So the Portuguese know what's up. It's kind of like a hidden gem of Europe, I think. Everyone goes to Spain. It's all about Portugal, guys. You should go there instead.
I need to check it out. I've been to Spain, but not Portugal.
I mean, Spain's great. Just Portugal, I just think is like a little better and a little cheaper and a little more beautiful. And you know, I think they have better rules for people like buying the visas in or whatever too. Those golden visas are a thing there. So I like Portugal. I'm here for it. Thanks for sharing that with us today on Scroll Patrol. I know it's a bit of a light news day on the Twitters, which is surprising, but sometimes no news is good news. You know, we've experienced so much chaos this year. I can go for wow, those are big waves.
No news is better than bad news.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm surprised no psycho is trying to surf these things. I always see these images. They're like, there's a Category 4 hurricane, and there's always one psycho out there who's like trying to catch the perfect wave. And I respect it, but those people are insane. The Portuguese, though, they know better. They're like, we're just going to stay on the shore. I like that, too. That'd be me. I'm the shore guy with the drone. I'm not getting close to that. Yikes. All right, I think we're wrapped for Scroll Patrol today, unless you got any more for me, Victor.
Nope, that's it. Last one.
All right, well, I guess it is that time, boys and girls, that we are wrapping up our Wednesday edition here at the Blockchain Report. As always, thank you so much for tuning in. We certainly love and appreciate you spending the mornings with us. And remember, we are on Mondays from 10 a.m. Pacific to 12 p.m., but the rest of the week, that's Tuesday through Thursday, you can find us from 8 a.m. Pacific to 10 a.m. Pacific right here on RoxomTV. And make sure that you're tuning in before and staying after. We have some amazing other shows that you are going to have to check out to truly understand how good some of these programs are. We have Walker America's show, that's once a week, is excellent. We of course have The Great Awakening. We got Jemmy in Hong Kong. It is an absolute list of heavy hitters that you are going to experience every time you tune into Roxom TV to get the most up-to-date world news so you know what's going on. And more importantly, why do these things matter to you? We hear about global news all the time, but we never understand why it actually affects us. And this is the place to go to learn all that info. So thank you again for tuning in, gang. If you haven't already, do the thing. Make sure to like, follow, and subscribe to Roxom TV, Roxom TV News, and me at Hank at Roxom TV on all platforms that you care about. And we'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place, same world news chaos right here on the Blockchain Report. So until then, everybody, stay safe, stay informed, and always make sure to hodl on. I'll see you guys and gals mañana.